All right, viewers, and jumping straight into our conversations this morning, we are being joined right now by Mr. Anthony James, a political activist within our space, because we are talking quite a bit about autonomy and moving Tobago's autonomy forward. So, first of all, special good morning and welcome to you, Mr. James. How are you doing?
Yeah, very pleasant morning to Kandace. I'm fine, and thanks for having me.
Great. And now, getting into the conversation right now, we're at a peculiar time. You've been here before, where autonomy is the focus of a lot of political conversations. And what is your view as to where we are right now in terms of, the conversations just rising up again?
Well, these things are not coincidental. And God is in charge. And He is moving Tobago along. And so that the death of Hocho Charles and Basdio Pandey, those deaths are known to God, and one might even argue they're even strategic and symbolic to Him, because the funeral of Hocho Charles has brought about a prick, so to speak, on the conscience, and so that the Prime Minister was there, and he was forced to make that announcement. Had there not been a funeral for Hocho Charles, I don't know what other event would have caused the Prime Minister to make the statement that he made. So from my perspective, I know that God is in charge, and the whole process of constitutional reform, it has started actually.
And it's no coincidence.
There's no coincidence, because I can safely say today, as I've said it before, there will be constitutional reform before the next general elections in 2025. And so that this year, 2024, will see a lot of convulsions, a lot of upheavals, and we're going to see unexpected things happening, because God is in charge and in control. And the history of Tobago cannot continue to be suppressed and oppressed and to be ridiculed. The people of Tobago must occupy their or real status, and our real status is as of a free people. Currently, when you listen to the talks on autonomy, you get the impression that the minds that are so speaking are not yet free. I'm talking about those in Tobago. Because when you're looking to measure your own autonomy and asking for a measure, because they are still asking for a measure. Now, A.N.R. Robinson, in the motion in the Parliament in 1977, actually it is written in the motion, he asked for internal self-government or a measure of autonomy. Now, if you are free, you can't have a measure of your freedom.
And then this is where we start to talk about self-determination.
Yes, and self-determination is a right. Like freedom is your right. Yourself. When God created you, He made you whole. The Creator designed you whole. And you have to utilize that wholeness. So you can't be talking of a part of yourself. And so that when people are speaking, they need to have that presence of mind. They need to catch themselves, so to speak, because when they're saying, well, we don't agree with this bill and we want this here and we want this here, they're still piecing and piecing and piecing. They are saying they are legitimizing their own bondage. And they are speaking as wardsmen of Trinidad and bondsmen of Trinidad. And that's the history. And we have to pull ourselves out of that history. It's not Trinidad to pull us out. We have to make ourselves free. In 1889, Tobago was made a ward of Trinidad. It continues today. And it's not simply a case of taking out the word ward. You have to take out the concept. You know what I'm saying? We have to take out the philosophy. We must remove bondage and replace it with freedom. Now, we have to also understand that when we are saying the Constitution, we must understand that that Constitution is not ours. We did not pen that constitution. We did not author the constitution. And meaning to say, no, we are not the authors of our own story right now. We are not the authors of our lives. That is, and people need to understand that so many people are coming and they are boasting about the constitution, not recognizing that the constitution is that article of their enslavement. Now, what our politicians have not recognized, that we are the ones, led by the political directorate, we are the ones to author our own constitution, to author our own freedom. So once you're talking about the constitution in your mind, and you're looking to find some autonomy and some freedom, you're looking for freedom in bondage.
So then these are at an interesting place where we've had several bills go to Parliament. We're now having where the Chief Secretary is going to come up with this document that we expect to see within the next few days with the differences of what Tobago wants compared to what's in the present bills before Parliament. Now, so should we not look at those bills anymore and focus on the Constitution and then work on what we want, or is there a specific bill that reflects exactly what Tobago wants and needs?
But that whole foray, if I may call it that, was really a foray, and from a certain perspective, in nonsense, really. In nonsense, because the perspective was wrong in the first place, because the perspective legitimized wardship. It legitimized Tobagonians as bondsmen or wardsmen of Trinidad.
This is each one of the bills that have gone.
Of the bills, the two bills are total disaster. I mean, watch me. For any intelligent human being, if it were Trinidadians living in Tobago or Americans living in Tobago, you could not have gotten such a document going to some parliament somewhere else to be free. The bill is both bills. I've read them before. I don't even bother to go back into them. They are total disaster and a waste of time. Both bills. I want Tobagonians to understand that. And at the end of those bills, Tobago would have gotten nowhere really. You would just sort of inched somewhere and maybe put you in a position now to bargain, give you some strength where you can articulate, as the case may be. But in terms, if you felt as though the bills were a panacea for Tobagonian life, you're really making a great mistake. And I'll give you the origin, because many times the conversation is going on and people forget. Now, you had Act 40 of 1996, which was passed in the Parliament November, December in 1996, just before the election. And that bill succeeded Act 37 of 1980, right? Now, I would have said, since back in 1998, I want people to understand, a lot of people jumping on board, and I can tell you, the politics in Tobago is very hypocritical. Many people who you see talking autonomy, from the political circle, they are trying to survive. They are trying to survive politically. And what is most important to them is getting back into power or holding on to power. So you're not getting a clear focus, a clear massaging on the issue itself. And remember, they were not part of the issue. So that I called for constitutional reform since in 1998. Mr. Hutchard Charles and Vanessa James came to the Bell Garden Community Center in 1998 with the Tobago Development Plan. And I looked through the plan very quickly, and I saw nothing about constitutional reform, because my mind was already free, because I'm not a ward of anybody. In my mind, from where I am, I live my life freely. And I said to them, I didn't see anything there. And Act 40 of 1996 cannot realize Tobago's potential. What we need is constitutional reform. I told them that back in 1998 in the Bell Garden Community Center. But when it came around to 2000, me and two other gentlemen, we formed the Tobago Liberation Movement to see about constitutional reform, not amending constitution as what is going on here today. You are amending something that is not yours. What you need is to throw that system totally outside. Revisit the history when Tobago and Trinidad, or when Tobago became a ward of Trinidad. It's from there you have to go back and make yourselves free. So I called for constitutional reform. I wrote, the Prime Minister who at the time was Basdio Pandey. This is why Pandey is talking constitutional reform. He got the letter from me, and he was so confused that when he responded to me, he addressed the letter, the heading on the letter as James. When they penned the letter, they said, "Dear Mr. Lewis." It was so much confusion, and I advised him, because the constitution is the problem. It is supervising the destruction of Tobago. And we are losing our population yearly. All of that I put there. And I copied the letter to Manning, who was the opposition leader, and to Aina Robinson, was the president, and I wrote Robinson a separate letter to meet with him, and I did so several couple times by the President House in Government House. Wrote up there to deal with the issue is constitutional reform. The form must change.
And so of course, it doesn't just affect us here in Tobago in terms of our powers, but it also affects so many things about how us as Trinidadians and Tobagonians live and function, and the government, and all of those things.
Definitely. It is the relationship between Tobago and Trinidad that must change. Right now, the constitutional relationship is that Tobago is answerable to Trinidad. It is there. If you have 2 out of 39, you are out of 41. It used to be 2 out of 36, was 34-2. So I came up with the whole thing about 34-2. Now it is 39-2. Before the election begins, you lose. You lose and when you lose everything that is yours. You have given that power is somewhere else. It's like you're playing cards and the jack is already set. Tobago is losing, right? And then now the system has gone on for so long till we actually believe we are legitimately part of this thing, and you hear the craziness that they want to hold on to a concept that is not it's not, the word is not written. They have come up with this thing called unitary state and boasting about unitary state as if there is something to boast. You hear people in Tobago talking about unitary state and boasting and looking to hold on to which unitary state to benefit who? Let me just quickly divert to sports, because there's always an easy way. You have Joshua James, an excellent cricketer, bowling, batting, fielding, everything, starring, but he's starring other ways, other areas. Well, I mean, he has never played for any team called Trinidad and Tobago. It's amazing.
Talk about it in terms of football.
He has never played. He made the West Indies team. He's on the West Indies emerging team. But he has never represented Trinidad and Tobago, because the consciousness of Trinidad and Tobago is a Trinidad consciousness. And it's all about the well-being and the prosperity, the aspirations of Trinidad. That rudely is what it is. And there are people here who are prospectivizing from that point. You know what I'm saying? So that Mr. Manning now, when he started what he called constitutional reform talks now, and I'm saying it's based on the letter that I wrote to Pandey and I addressed to him, because in that letter I called for a president. I'm the person who came up with that. I called for an elected president, but a federal president. Mr. Manning turned that around to turn himself from prime minister to president, and he wrote the constitution. Many people forgetting the constitutions are already written, you know. And what he wanted to do is to make himself, first of all, president of Trinidad and Tobago. So Tobago remains in the same place where it is. And the plan was to extend that to the Eastern Caribbean, because they were very poor and there was a lot of gas and oil in Tobago at the time. So they wanted to hold on to Tobago. If you go back to 2008, in the Municipalities Amendment Corporation Bill, it was read out in the Parliament, discussed in the Parliament on the 27th of July in 2008. And they were reforming now their local government bodies in Trinidad. And Kamala Prasad Bissesa saw the danger in what they were doing. And in fact, they see Tobago as a local government. We are not local government to them. We are not a locality of Trinidad. We are our own people, with our own country, with our own identity and our own name, Tobago.
So now, where we are right now in this whole situation, so with Mr. Charles passing and Mr. Charles' self-governance has reared its head and it's on everybody's lips. Now, should Tobago now, instead of just focusing on the actual bills, focus on constitutional reform and make sure that part of the legislation that governs everything gives us the power for us to decide exactly what we want in our bills?
This is it. So the question is where we are.
Yeah.
No. And anybody to catapult Tobago to the rightful status of Tobago, it will be the leadership. So that the leadership must possess that understanding. They have to be so wide up. They have to be made free. You have to be free in order to do that. Because if you're arguing from a perspective, from a position of freedom, you cannot be resisted. Right now, the advance, the articulation is being made from a position of bondage. And I'm saying that's why you have those bills. Remember, those who are in office now, they are not responsible for the two bills. No. Respectfully, both Mr. Charles and Mr. London occupied psychologically a position of bondage. And that is why you got those bills going down. So that, I wanted to answer the question how it all evolved. So that Mr. Manning, in order to achieve his agenda, because the idea was to have presidential jet and all those things, people have to remember. So that what was happening critically back in that same bill, in that Municipalities Amendment Corporation bill in Trinidad there, to amend the bill down there. Mr. Manning said there, when Kamala Prasad Besesa asked him, what about Tobago? Are you going to be bringing them back into this net? He didn't answer the question directly. But what he said is that there is a discussion going on in Tobago which can end up to a federation. Because constitutional reform is about a partnership between Tobago and Trinidad. Politically, it is called a federation. And Manning was warning them that they need to be very careful about that because of the marine resources. He said, let me be careful how I put it. He said there is a regime which governs the law of the sea, UNCLOS, the United Nations Conventions of the Laws of the Seas. And he said, if that happens, it was implying to Kamala, they will lose all the resources in Tobago. So moving forward, he got Ellis Clark, who was still alive, to write a constitution. And this is, I'm coming home now. In that constitution, the only line for Tobago in that constitution, they reform everything, turn the prime minister into president. And that's why the election came early in 2010. And you know what the line wrote? Tobago to be prescribed. And that is where now he called Mr. Ovid London, Chief Secretary, to start the autonomy talk now in Tobago. So they finished, and Tobago now was to grease his head and fit in to the Trinidad Constitution without them in power. Now, so we have two options here. The options of bondage, where we are bastardized Trinidadians, so remain as a ward of Trinidad, and we talk about autonomy, and it will never end. The police is controlled by Trinidad. The economy is controlled by Trinidad. In that bill there that they sent to Trinidad, it did not even address sports. Trinidad will continue to have all the selectors, and Trinidad will continue to be national. And here people come in the media and they say, well, Tobago, and nationally, oh, who is nationally? You have Tobago here, and then somebody else is national. The state is Tobago and Trinidad, or Trinidad and Tobago, but you have Trinidad and nationally. You don't have Trinidad and nationally. Trinidad is a synonym for national. National is a synonym for Trinidad. You have to see, we have to see, fellow Tobago, the mess of the minds operating in Tobago. So that is either the option to continue as bastardized Trinidadians and in total ignorance, come on the TV, the media, and just keep talking rubbish, or we free ourselves, which is constitutional reform now, to be partners with Trinidad.
And that is where we will have to leave our discussions here this morning. Always quite a lot from you, Mr. James. And I mean, I certainly appreciate the history lesson and so on. And of course, you know, revoking some memories and stuff of some of the things that happened in the past and how easily we forget some of these things that have happened to lead us to where we are right now. So thank you, Mr. James. And certainly we'll be continuing our conversations with you as time go on and as we track this process as to where we're going. Are we going to be focused on constitutional reform, or are we going to just be sticking with the bills? Yeah, we're going to see how it goes. So thank you, Mr. James. And viewers, don't go anywhere. We've got a lot more coming up for you after the break.